They say the world is loud, but it's not. It's hollow. Beneath the static and the spectacle, there's a silence more deafening than noise, a silence where meaning used to live. You feel it, don't you? That weightless ache in your chest as the world spins faster and faster, guided by screens, trends, and ideologies that shift like sand. Something ancient has broken. Not with a bang, but with the soft rot of time. Not by war, but by forgetting. We are not lost because we moved too quickly, but because we no longer know where we're supposed to be going. Once upon a time, morality was a compass, not perfect, not pure, but anchored in myth, community, and continuity. There were stories that stretched beyond us, laws not made by men but handed down by gods, or so we believed. There was weight in every decision, sacredness in sacrifice, and shame that had the power to reform. Now, what remains of that scaffolding lies buried beneath 1,000 smiling affirmations, and we wonder why nothing holds. Friedrich Nietzsche saw this before anyone else, not with bitterness, but with brutal clarity. He stood at the edge of the modern world and declared, "God is dead." But few understood the scream behind that sentence. It wasn't celebration, it was a funeral. It was a warning. He wasn't speaking of a literal God, as some shallow interpretations claim. He was pointing at the soul of Western civilization, its ethics, its duties, its beliefs in right and wrong as something objective, divine, fixed. He saw that this foundation, this moral order built over centuries, was crumbling not because it had been disproven, but because people simply stopped believing in it. And when belief dies, so too does the structure it holds up. Morality didn't collapse in a moment, it rotted slowly, like a tree from the inside out. Today, we live in the ruins of that collapse. We talk of values, but they are floating disconnected from depth. We speak of good and evil as if they were preferences. The sacred has become satire. The profane is sold as liberation, and in the vacuum left behind, we are told to follow your truth, as if truth were a playlist, a flavor, a filter. Nietzsche didn't see this as freedom. He saw it as nihilism, a condition of spiritual anemia, where nothing means anything, and anything can be justified. We've dressed this emptiness in the language of progress. We've traded duty for desire, community for convenience, principle for performance. But no one dares to ask, at what cost? We are freer than ever, and yet we are lonelier, more anxious, more medicated, more fractured than any generation in history. The irony burns. In our pursuit to liberate ourselves from all constraints, we have created a world with no edges, no grounding, no center. And without center, the soul cannot orient itself. The question isn't whether God is dead. The question is, what rises in his place? Because something always does. Nature abhors a vacuum, and so does the human spirit. In the absence of divine order, we begin to invent new gods, ideologies, identities, brands, algorithms. We place our faith in systems and movements, hoping they will give us the meaning we no longer find in tradition. But they're brittle. They fracture under scrutiny. They demand loyalty without grace, belief without reflection, justice without mercy. Nietzsche called this the transvaluation of values, when the old values die, and in their place, new ones emerge that are inverted, unstable, and often destructive. What was once called humility is now weakness. What was once called pride is now empowerment. The virtuous man becomes the villain, and the self becomes sovereign. But sovereignty without self-awareness is tyranny. And that is the quiet horror of our time. We have declared ourselves kings of a kingdom we no longer understand. We speak of self-expression as if it were salvation. But expression without essence is just noise. It is not freedom to do whatever we want. It is only freedom if it connects us to something deeper, truer, harder. What Nietzsche feared was not a world without morality, but a world where morality becomes a mask detached from its roots, performative, weaponized. He foresaw a culture where everyone becomes a preacher, and no one seeks redemption. This isn't just philosophy. This is your life. This is every decision you make when no one is watching. This is the moment you betray your own conscience to avoid being cancelled, or when you defend a lie because it's trending. This is the unease that haunts you when the crowd applauds, but your soul recoils. That ache is not weakness. It's the ghost of your morality, whispering from the ruins. Nietzsche didn't give answers. He issued a dare. If the old morality is dead, what will you build in its place? Not what will you believe, but what will you become? Because in a world where values are no longer inherited, they must be forged. And forging requires fire. Fire doesn't ask for permission. It consumes. It tests. It reveals what is real by burning away what is not. And so must we now enter the furnace. If traditional morality is gone, if the altars are empty, if the heavens are silent, if the commandments have turned to dust, then the only honest path forward is not nostalgia, not denial, but confrontation. A reckoning with what is left of us when all the scaffolding is stripped away. Because here's the truth most cannot face. For all its flaws, traditional morality offered something terrifying and precious limits. It drew lines in the sand between right and wrong, sacred and profane, duty and indulgence. It bound us not because it hated freedom, but because it understood something we've forgotten. Freedom without form is a curse. When the body is cut loose from the skeleton, it doesn't dance, it collapses. Today we worship the self raw, unrefined, unquestioned. We are told the highest good is to be authentic, to speak your truth, to do what feels right. But Nietzsche knew better. He warned that without an external moral framework, the self doesn't ascend, it fractures. The self, left unchecked, becomes 1,000 screaming voices, each demanding to be obeyed. And when every voice is king, there is no kingdom, only chaos. What we've inherited is not liberty. It's a kind of spiritual entropy. Everything is permitted, and nothing is forgiven. You can be anything, but you must never offend. You can speak your mind, but only if it aligns with the script. You are told to discover who you are, but every mirror you find is a marketplace selling you a curated identity, an aesthetic, a brand. And so you dress the corpse of your soul in borrowed costumes, hoping someone will tell you that you matter. But you do not matter because of how you perform. You matter because of how you carry yourself through the storm. Morality was never about performance, it was about character, integrity, courage, the ability to say no when it would be easier to say yes, the power to restrain when the world cheers for indulgence, the wisdom to ask not, "What do I want?" but what is worthy of wanting. Nietzsche believed that the fall of traditional morality would not lead to progress, but to paralysis. And what do we see today? A society paralyzed by choice. An age where technology gives us endless access, and yet we are spiritually amputated. An age where moral outrage is a sport, and true moral reflection is rare. We scream louder and louder about justice, but our voices ring hollow because we no longer share a language of virtue. You see, when morality dies, judgment doesn't disappear, it metastasizes. It becomes tribal, reactive, viral. It becomes a weapon in the hands of the loudest, not the wisest. And without a shared moral foundation, every conversation becomes war. Every disagreement is heresy. We no longer debate, we excommunicate. We no longer persuade, we cancel. And in the end, we are left alone with our own echo, convinced we are righteous, because no one dares to contradict us. But that is not strength. That is the weakness of a world without truth. And Nietzsche saw that too. He called it the last man, the future human who seeks only comfort, safety, pleasure. A creature so small, so domesticated, that he cannot bear the weight of responsibility or transcendence. He no longer dreams, only consumes. He no longer sacrifices, only indulges. He lives a long life but never truly lives. The last man has no need for morality, because he has no appetite for greatness. He fears pain more than he desires truth. He trades the sublime for the convenient. He replaces myth with algorithm. But deep inside, beneath the automation and the anesthetics, something ancient still stirs. a hunger not for pleasure, but for purpose, a fire not to burn the world, but to forge a soul worthy of living in it. And that is where Nietzsche did not stop. That is where his warning becomes a challenge. If traditional morality has collapsed, then something must rise in its place, not arbitrary rules, not recycled dogma, but a new ethos, forged by individuals brave enough to look into the abyss without flinching. He called this the Übermensch, not a superhuman in strength, but in spirit. One who creates values from the marrow of their being, one who does not inherit meaning, but gives it. This is not egoism, it is not narcissism, it is a sacred act of creation. To become someone who can say, I will be the foundation I was never given. I will build the spine I was told to abandon. I will hold myself to a higher standard, not because the world demands it, but because my soul does. This is what it means to rise after the death of morals. To become a moral creator, not a moral consumer. But this is not for everyone. Most will reject it. Most will cling to the ruins, dressing them up in nostalgia or irony. Others will drown in relativism, declaring all values equal because they fear choosing one and being wrong. But for the few who dare, for the few who will not be comforted by illusions or pacified by likes for them, the death of traditional morality is not the end. It is the beginning of something more dangerous, more demanding, and far more divine. Divinity in this new world does not descend from the clouds. It does not arrive robed in commandments or cloaked in miracle. It rises from within. It bleeds. It breaks. It rebuilds. It looks nothing like the false idols of today, those hollow caricatures of success and status, flaunting their dopamine highs like prophets of progress. No. The new divine is forged in silence. It is born in solitude. It speaks not in slogans, but in sacrifice. Because if you truly listen, in the stillness between the noise, you'll hear it. A deeper voice. Not your impulses, not your conditioning, but something older. Something primal. The part of you that remembers what it means to stand for something, even when the world calls it madness. The part of you that aches when you betray your own word. The part that knows instinctively that the price of integrity is loneliness and still chooses it. This is the frontier Nietzsche was pointing toward, not a nihilistic wasteland, but an untamed wilderness of moral rebirth. He knew that once the great anchors were shattered, once the myths lost their magic and the institutions their authority, the burden of meaning would fall back onto the individual. And with it, the responsibility to create a life not just of survival, but of significance. Not comfort, not conformity. Significance. But that task is heavier than most are prepared to bear. Because when you reject the morality handed to you, you also reject the right to blame it. You become the author, and the pen burns in your hand. It demands you answer questions you can no longer defer to tradition. What is justice when the old laws no longer apply? What is love when the roles have dissolved? What is courage when no one is watching and no reward is guaranteed? The world will not help you answer. It will tempt you to numb the questions. It will sell you narratives, each with their own costume of virtue. But the soul is not fooled by costumes. It knows. It always knows. And so many today are haunted not by ghosts, but by the selves they were meant to become. Not by sin, but by potential unrealized. Because deep down, we all feel the friction between what we are and what we could be. And it hurts. It hurts in places we can't name. So we try to anesthetize the ache. We scroll, we swipe, we binge, we virtue signal. We perform moral outrage to feel righteous without the cost of being just. We drown in distraction because contemplation is a mirror, and most cannot bear to see their own reflection without a script. But Nietzsche demands that we look, not to judge, to awaken. Because beneath all the rot, all the decay of inherited dogma and hollow virtue, there is something worth saving. Not the forms, not the rituals, but the fire they once protected. The fire that built civilizations. The fire that shaped heroes and saints and martyrs and poets. That fire is not dead. It is buried. Beneath cynicism, beneath irony, beneath despair. And the only way to reclaim it is through confrontation with ourselves. You must be willing to dismantle your own illusions, to tear down the lies you were taught to survive by, to question the comforts that have become chains. And you must be willing to bleed in that process, because the parts of you that are false will scream when they are exposed. But this is not destruction for the sake of destruction. This is creation through truth. To stand at the edge of moral collapse and not fall, that is power. Not dominance, not control, but power in its oldest form, responsibility embraced. The power to hold the line in the absence of rules. The power to choose restraint when indulgence is expected. The power to shape your life as if it were a work of art, with every act a brushstroke, every word a chisel mark on the sculpture of your character. This is what it means to become the Übermensch. Not a master of others, but a master of self. Not a denier of past morality, but its redeemer. One who does not mock virtue, but revives it from the inside out, reborn not as dogma, but as destiny. A morality that is lived, not lectured. Proven in action, tested in silence, affirmed by conscience, not applause. And let us be clear, this is not for everyone. Most will seek to avoid this fire. They will continue to wear borrowed values like armor made of paper. They will parrot opinions they never forged. They will outsource their conscience to the algorithm. But for those who are ready, truly ready, Nietzsche's warning becomes an invitation. A threshold, a sacred dare, to step into a world where the old gods are gone, and yet still choose to walk upright, to love fiercely, to speak honestly, to build something beautiful not because it is expected, but because it is right, even when no one notices, even when no one agrees, even when it costs you everything. This is the morality born after the death of morals. This is the soul reawakened in a time of sleepwalkers. This is the sacred rebellion, not against law but against spiritual laziness, not against tradition but against the corruption of tradition, not against the past but against the refusal to transcend it. So now the question stands before you not as a whisper but as a roar in your blood. What will you build from the ashes? Will you become another shadow drifting through the ruins, scavenging meaning from the broken idols of others? Or will you rise, eyes open, hands burning, to carve your own law into the stone of your being? The age of inheritance is over. The mantle is yours now. You are the cathedral. You are the altar. You are the fire that must keep itself alive. Not to save the world, but to save your soul from fading into the gray fog of convenience and cowardice. This is not about being right. This is about being true. True to the voice inside you that refuses to die. The voice that still believes in honor, in courage, in something sacred though the world has forgotten the words for it. The voice that will not let you sleep through your own life. Because in the end, Nietzsche's warning is not about the death of God or the collapse of morals. It is about the terrifying freedom we are left with, and what we choose to do with it. So choose, not with fear, not with borrowed guilt, but with fire. Build the self no one ever built for you. Live the truth no one dared to teach you, and become the kind of soul this world no longer makes, but desperately needs. Because morality is not dead, it is waiting. For you.